Starting in late 2024, Microsoft quietly introduced something that fundamentally changes how Windows operates. We're talking about giving artificial intelligence systems direct access to where you store everything: tax documents, family photos, bank statements, medical records, personal correspondence. The vast majority of Windows users don't even know this capability exists on their machines right now. This isn't some distant possibility or conspiracy theory. Microsoft publicly announced this functionality at their Ignite conference and began deploying it to testing groups in November. What makes this particularly concerning is that Microsoft's own security engineers published official warnings about the specific risks involved, including unauthorized software installation and potential data theft. Let me walk you through what's actually happening here, why cybersecurity professionals are sounding alarms, and what you need to do immediately to secure your system. Microsoft markets this as Agent Workspace, positioning it as groundbreaking technology that turns Windows 11 into what they call the first truly agentic operating system. The official documentation describes it as creating a separate, contained environment within Windows where AI systems can operate autonomously while you continue your regular work. On the surface, the concept sounds helpful. You authorize an AI assistant to handle tasks like organizing files, composing emails, managing your schedule, or searching through documents for specific information. This AI operates in its own isolated session with a dedicated desktop environment, somewhat like having multiple user accounts on a single computer. Microsoft presents this as more efficient than running full virtual machines while maintaining security boundaries and user control. Here's the technical breakdown of how it functions. When you activate these experimental agentic capabilities in Windows 11, the system creates dedicated local user accounts specifically for AI assistants. Each assistant receives its own workspace with defined permissions, theoretically giving you control over what each one can access. Microsoft states that assistants are programmed to request authorization before accessing your personal folders, and that they generate comprehensive audit logs documenting every action taken. These AI systems can install and execute applications available to all users on your computer, though they cannot access programs installed exclusively for your specific user account. According to Microsoft's vision, this architecture strikes a balance between productivity gains and operational transparency. They envision these assistants automating tedious tasks, sorting massive file collections, extracting information from invoices, coordinating meetings across different time zones, drafting routine communications. The stated goal is freeing you to focus on high-value work while automation handles the repetitive details. But here's what the promotional materials don't emphasize. When you enable this workspace and grant authorization to an assistant, that AI gains both read and write access to your most sensitive folders by default. We're specifically talking about documents, downloads, desktop, music, pictures, and videos. These are exactly where most people store tax returns, medical records, family photographs, business contracts, bank statements, legal documents, private messages, and personal projects. Security researchers immediately recognize the implications. Tom's Hardware reported that Microsoft confirmed these inherent security risks in a support document released alongside the feature. The company explicitly cautioned that agentic AI applications introduce what they call novel security risks, specifically something termed cross-prompt injection attacks. In straightforward terms, this means malicious content hidden inside an apparently innocent document or embedded within a user interface. Element can override the AI's original instructions. The result: unauthorized data extraction or malware installation without your knowledge or consent. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like in practice. Imagine downloading a PDF that appears to be a standard invoice or resume. Hidden within that PDF is malicious code specifically crafted to manipulate the AI assistant. When the assistant scans your files during a routine task like organizing documents or searching for information, it encounters that malicious instruction. The assistant, interpreting what it perceives as a legitimate command, could then copy sensitive files to an external location controlled by an attacker, or download and execute malware disguised as a necessary update. Microsoft's own documentation directly acknowledges this risk. The company admitted that AI models still experience functional limitations, occasionally produce hallucinations, and generate unexpected outputs. When combined with access to your personal files, these limitations transform into exploitable vulnerabilities. You might assume this only matters if you're downloading questionable files from untrusted sources. That's not how modern attacks operate. Cybersecurity experts warn that these injection attacks can be embedded in documents received from colleagues, in email attachments that appear completely legitimate, or even in web content that the AI interacts with during background operations. Multiple technology publications highlighted another critical concern. While the assistants operate with their own user accounts, those accounts still possess substantial permissions within your system. If an attacker compromises an assistant through prompt injection, they effectively establish a foothold inside your computer with permissions to read, write, and execute files across your most important folders. Microsoft has implemented audit logs and tamper-evident tracking, but these measures only help you discover a breach after it occurs. They don't prevent the initial compromise. The response from privacy and security professionals has been immediate and concerned. Tom's Hardware published detailed analysis questioning whether users should trust AI assistants with access to everything on their PC. Other technology news outlets reported that Microsoft acknowledges AI assistants can hallucinate and fall victim to attacks, yet continues pushing forward with deployment. Digital rights organizations have raised concerns about the breadth of default permissions and the absence of robust safeguards against prompt injection. The fundamental legal and ethical issues revolve around informed consent and data minimization, two cornerstone principles of modern privacy law. Under regulations like GDPR and similar emerging frameworks, users should receive clear, comprehensible information about what data is being accessed and why. They should only grant access to the minimum data necessary for specific tasks. This workspace feature, by default, grants access to entire folders containing years of accumulated personal information. Even though Microsoft requires per assistant permission, the scope of that permission is extraordinarily broad. A user authorizing assistance with photo organization might not realize they're simultaneously granting access to every financial document in their downloads folder or every legal contract in their documents folder. Consider the real-world implications for people in vulnerable situations. Think about someone who recently left an abusive relationship. Their computer contains documents with their new address, employment information, therapy notes, and legal filings for protection orders. If an AI assistant with access to those folders gets compromised through a prompt injection attack, that information could be extracted and potentially traced back to them, creating genuine physical danger. This isn't hypothetical fear-mongering. Domestic violence prevention organizations have extensively documented the dangers of technology-enabled stalking and surveillance. Or consider a journalist using their personal laptop to communicate with confidential sources. Even with encrypted communications in transit, journalists typically store notes, contact information, and draft articles locally. An AI assistant with read access could scan those files during background tasks. If that assistant gets tricked by malicious content, sensitive information about sources could be exposed, endangering lives and undermining press freedom. Medical professionals face identical risks. A therapist working from home might store session notes and treatment plans in their documents folder. Those local files contain deeply private information protected by laws like HIPAA. If an AI assistant accesses those files and later gets compromised, the breach could violate patient confidentiality and expose the therapist to legal liability. Small business owners and freelancers frequently store contracts, invoices, client correspondence, and proprietary work in their personal folders. An assistant tasked with organizing those files has access to trade secrets, pricing strategies, and client lists. A competitor using a prompt injection attack could potentially steal that information without triggering traditional antivirus or firewall alerts because the data is being accessed by a legitimate system feature. After security researchers and privacy advocates raised these alarms, Microsoft issued clarifications. The company emphasized that these workspace features remain disabled by default and are currently only available to testing participants as an experimental preview. Users must explicitly enable experimental agentic features through administrator settings before any AI assistant can operate. Microsoft confirmed that assistants request permission on a per-assistant basis before accessing known folders, and users can revoke those permissions anytime. The company published design principles emphasizing transparency, user control, and security isolation. According to Microsoft, every assistant action gets logged, Assistants operate with limited privileges, and they can only be accessed by the user who created them. These are meaningful safeguards reflecting responsible development, but they don't eliminate the underlying risks. Security experts point out that the permission model relies on users understanding what they're granting access to. Most people lack the technical expertise to evaluate whether an AI assistant should have read and write access to their entire documents folder. The phrase "organize my files" sounds harmless, but it translates to scan every file in these folders, analyze their contents, move them, rename them, and potentially interact with embedded code. Even with Microsoft's implemented safeguards, significant vulnerabilities persist. The most critical remains the cross-prompt injection attack risk. Microsoft has acknowledged this threat, but hasn't demonstrated a foolproof defense against it. As of now, this remains an active research area in AI security, and there's no industry consensus on complete mitigation. Technology publications reported that Microsoft's own warnings describe these risks as novel, meaning traditional security measures like antivirus software and firewalls aren't designed to detect or prevent them. Another persistent issue is permission scope. Even though Microsoft now requires per-assistant approval, the default folders assistants can access include nearly everything most users consider private. There's no granular control allowing you to grant an assistant access to only specific files or only files created after a certain date. It's all or nothing for each major folder. If you want an assistant to help organize photos, you must grant access to your entire pictures folder, which might also contain screenshots of sensitive documents, medical images, or private family moments you never intended to share. Your entire digital life in those folders is protected by a permission system that assumes you fully understand the implications of clicking yes. The system is only as secure as your ability to recognize a malicious document or interface element designed to trick the AI. Unlike traditional malware that needs to exploit a software vulnerability, prompt injection attacks exploit the AI's own functionality. The assistant is doing exactly what it's designed to do, reading and processing files. It's just being tricked into following the wrong instructions. So what can you actually do to protect yourself right now? If you're running Windows 11, the first critical step is verifying that experimental agentic features are disabled. These features are off by default, but confirmation is essential. Open your settings app, navigate to privacy and security, and look for sections labeled experimental features or Copilot settings. Ensure any toggle related to agent workspace, experimental agentic features, or AI assistant background tasks is turned off. If you don't see these options, your Windows version likely doesn't include them yet, as they're currently limited to testing builds. Second, review your Copilot settings even if Agent Workspace is disabled. Your personal computer has transformed into something you might not have agreed to, a sophisticated monitoring system that analyzes your behavior, catalogs your habits, and transmits this intelligence to corporate servers. The operating system powering the majority of desktop machines worldwide now includes artificial intelligence capabilities that extend far beyond helpful suggestions or voice recognition. These systems actively observe your keystrokes, examine your documents, and track your application usage under the premise of enhancing productivity. Windows 11 arrived with deeply integrated AI functionality that operates continuously in the background. Technologies like intelligent application monitoring, cloud-connected assistance, and predictive behavior analysis now function as standard features on millions of devices. Independent security analysts have documented concerning patterns in how these systems collect and process user data, findings serious enough to trigger formal inquiries from regulatory bodies. Governments have prohibited their use on official equipment, and major corporations have halted deployment plans entirely. More than 500 million computers that could upgrade to Windows 11 remain on older versions specifically to avoid these surveillance mechanisms. What follows is a detailed examination of exactly what data these AI systems access, why cybersecurity professionals describe them as observation infrastructure disguised as helpful tools, and concrete steps you can take to protect your privacy before these features become impossible to disable. Microsoft introduced its integrated AI assistant in autumn 2023 as the flagship feature of Windows 11's intelligence capabilities. The marketing message emphasized convenience. An AI companion that understands your workflow, helps navigate system settings, composes documents, condenses emails, and responds to questions about anything displayed on your monitor. The company presented this as an intuitive enhancement that would make computers easier to use while respecting user privacy. The technical technical implementation requires broad system access. The AI connects to every file in your reach, monitors which programs you launch, and establishes persistent connections to Microsoft's cloud infrastructure for processing. Microsoft described this as seamless productivity improvement that would eliminate tedious menu navigation and flatten the learning curve for complex tasks. The presentation suggested a natural evolution in how humans interact with machines. Security researchers who examined the actual operational mechanics discovered something considerably more invasive than the marketing suggested. When corporate security departments began rigorous testing in enterprise environments during late 2023 and early 2024, they immediately identified critical vulnerabilities. Security firms published research demonstrating that the AI assistant could access and potentially expose confidential information through what analysts termed oversharing exploits. The system operates with identical permissions as the logged-in user, meaning if an employee can view salary databases, confidential contracts, or merger documentation, the AI can read and reference all of that material when generating responses. The danger intensifies when users pose questions that inadvertently trigger data exposure to unauthorized recipients. A manager requesting help drafting a restructuring email might receive AI-generated content incorporating restricted HR documents. An executive asking for quarterly summaries could see responses referencing unannounced product launches or financial projections meant to remain classified. Testing in typical corporate networks revealed that over 15% of files containing sensitive information face exposure risks from these AI systems. The artificial intelligence lacks understanding of corporate information governance, data classification, frameworks, or need-to-know restrictions. It simply accesses whatever the user can reach and incorporates that material to generate comprehensive answers. Privacy researchers examining data collection practices found that the system transmits queries, contextual information, and usage patterns to Microsoft's cloud services. Although the company claims secure processing, the fundamental architecture means your questions, the files access to answer them, and metadata about your computing behavior all leave your device and enter Microsoft's data ecosystem. Institutional response was immediate and decisive. In March 2024, the United States House of Representatives banned congressional staff from using Microsoft's AI assistant entirely. The House's chief administrative officer issued guidance stating that cybersecurity officials deemed the tool unauthorized due to threats of leaking congressional data to non-approved cloud services. The directive ordered complete removal from all House devices. This was not precautionary action based on theoretical concerns. The House Cybersecurity Office had conducted technical evaluation and determined the system posed unacceptable threats to congressional data security. Simultaneously, multiple Fortune 500 companies quietly blocked deployments after their security teams raised identical concerns. A survey of enterprise security professionals found that 67% expressed concerns about AI tools exposing sensitive information through improper access controls or data leakage. The UK's Information Commissioner's Office told journalists that organizations must conduct thorough data protection impact assessments before deploying AI tools processing personal information, and that companies cannot assume these systems automatically comply with privacy regulations. These were not complaints from activists. These were institutional decisions made by government cybersecurity offices, corporate security teams, and data protection regulators after rigorous technical evaluation. Consider the real-world implications. A defense contractor employee working on classified proposals has every technical specification, security clearance detail, and government contract term indexed by the AI's context awareness. If their account is compromised through phishing, an attacker gains not just file access, but access to an AI that has already analyzed and can summarize all classified information. A lawyer using the system to draft legal arguments provides the AI with every confidential client communication, litigation strategy document, and settlement negotiation detail. If opposing counsel discovers this through legal discovery or the firm experiences a data breach, attorney-client privilege protections become meaningless when the AI has already processed and potentially exposed that information. A human resources director asking for help drafting a performance plan might receive responses incorporating confidential medical records, past disciplinary actions, or salary information information that should never appear in the document. The director might not notice because they trust the AI understands appropriate boundaries. A financial analyst requesting market research summaries could receive responses incorporating insider information, unreleased earnings data, or confidential client portfolios. The AI does not understand securities regulations or insider trading restrictions. It simply uses whatever data it can access to provide complete answers. After criticism throughout 2024, Microsoft announced changes supposedly addressing data exposure risks. The company introduced commercial data protection, claiming to prevent user prompts from training AI models. Administrative controls allow IT departments to disable the assistant for specific user groups. Integration with data loss prevention systems theoretically extends protective policies to AI interactions. Enhanced auditing capabilities supposedly let security teams monitor what information the AI accesses. These sounded like meaningful improvements, and Microsoft promoted them as evidence the company takes enterprise security seriously. But when security researchers and corporate IT teams tested these protections throughout 2025, they found significant gaps. Commercial data protection does not prevent the AI from accessing sensitive data initially. It only claims to prevent that data from training models. Information still gets transmitted to Microsoft's cloud for processing. Administrative controls require complex configuration across multiple services and lack granular control over data types the AI can access. Data loss prevention integration depends on organizations having already implemented comprehensive classification systems, which most have not. Even properly configured, it cannot prevent the AI from accessing data users legitimately have permission to view but should not be incorporating into AI-generated content. Security analysts published research in October 2025 showing that Microsoft's security controls are reactive rather than preventive. The system allows problematic data access to occur, then relies on auditing to detect it afterward. This approach fails to prevent initial exposure, which is exactly what enterprise security policies aim to stop. You can take control immediately, and the process is more straightforward than Microsoft's settings menu suggests. Start by completely disabling the AI assistant. Right-click its taskbar icon and select taskbar settings, then toggle off the button. To prevent background operation, navigate to Settings, Privacy and Security, General, and disable all options related to AI features and personalized experiences. Address broader data collection feeding Microsoft's AI systems. Go to Settings, Privacy and Security, Diagnostics and Feedback, and set optional diagnostic data to off. This stops Windows from sending detailed behavior telemetry to Microsoft servers. In the same section, review activity history and disable the option letting Windows collect your activities, preventing the system from building a timeline of everything you do. For complete removal of AI components, PowerShell commands and third-party tools systematically strip out these features. Widely used open source scripts available online allow you to run administrative commands that remove AI packages, disable related services, modify registry entries controlling AI behavior, and prevent automatic reinstallation during updates. This requires technical comfort with PowerShell and administrator access, but provides comprehensive removal that standard interfaces do not offer. Your operating system is no longer just a tool running applications and managing files. It has become a data collection platform feeding artificial intelligence systems designed to predict your needs, analyze your behavior, and integrate your entire digital life into cloud services controlled by a corporation profiting from that data. This quiet shift turns a personal computer into an observation device constantly learning from everything you do. Microsoft's chief marketing officer told investors in November 2025 that the company plans to make AI integration so deeply embedded that removing it becomes practically impossible for average users. That statement is not marketing language. It is a declaration about future platform design. The roadmap involves connecting every aspect of your computing experience to AI systems requiring cloud connectivity, continuous monitoring, and comprehensive data access. The billion users still running older Windows versions despite ended support, and the 500 million devices eligible for upgrades that refuse to switch are making deliberate choices. They are choosing stability, predictability, and limited data footprints over promises of smart features bundled with extensive tracking. They have evaluated what AI-powered operating systems actually mean for privacy and autonomy, and decided productivity benefits do not justify surveillance costs. You have options right now. You can open your Windows settings and disable AI features, turning your computer into a monitoring device. That means spending a few minutes in privacy menus, turning off personalized experiences, restricting diagnostic data, and shutting down integrated assistants assistants watching what you do in the background. Or you can share this information with someone using Windows 11 because they deserve to know what their operating system actually does before deciding whether to accept or reject these features. Your computer should work for you, not report on you. The same principle should apply to every connected device in your life. It's January 2025, and inside Microsoft's executive boardroom, the mood is grim. StatCounter just released devastating global market share data, and the numbers tell a story that boardroom members could barely comprehend. Windows 11, Microsoft's flagship operating system launched 3.5 years ago, sits at just 28.4% global market share. 3 months earlier, it was 31.2%. The decline isn't theoretical, it's real, it's measurable, it's accelerating. But the real shock isn't Windows 11's stagnation, it's what's happening with Windows 10. Microsoft officially ended support for Windows 10 7 months ago. They told users to upgrade, they pushed notifications, they made the upgrade process unavoidable on new hardware, and users responded by staying on Windows 10. The deprecated, no longer supported operating system now commands 58.7% of the market. Think about that for a second. Users are actively choosing to run unsupported software rather than adopt the brand new replacement Microsoft spent billions developing. The truly nuclear number emerges when you look at everything else. Linux combined with Mac OS now accounts for 26.5% of global market share. Over the past 12 months, these alternative platforms combined grew by 6.4 percentage points, while Windows 11 contracted by 2.8 points. The math is simple and terrifying for Redmond. For the first time in 3 decades, Windows' overall market share has slipped below 65%. The platform isn't declining slowly, it's collapsing in real time. According to multiple board members present at that meeting, Bill Gates wasn't just disappointed, he was furious. The real story, however, isn't about global statistics. It's about which specific markets are abandoning Windows and why. Start with Japan. Japan is one of the world's largest technology markets and has historically been a Windows stronghold. Japanese corporations, from retail chains to manufacturing facilities to financial institutions, built their entire digital infrastructure around Windows. That loyalty should have been unshakable. Then came Windows 11. In March 2025, Japan's Ministry of Internal Affairs released comprehensive digital infrastructure analysis. The Windows 11 adoption figure was shocking. After 3.5 years on the market, Japanese businesses had adopted Windows 11 at a rate of just 11.3%. Windows 10 remained entrenched at 83.2%. Japan wasn't gradually transitioning to the new operating system. Japan was actively rejecting it. Microsoft's response was to send a delegation to Tokyo. They met with major corporate customers. They asked directly why adoption was so low. The feedback was methodical, specific, and damning. Japanese businesses explained that Windows 11 was fundamentally incompatible with how they worked. The centered taskbar, a signature Windows 11 design change, disrupted muscle memory developed over decades. Japanese text input methods that worked flawlessly on Windows 10 were broken on Windows 11. Specialized enterprise software that Japanese corporations depended on would crash or malfunction on the new system, and the TPM 2.0 requirement, a security feature Microsoft made mandatory, locked out millions of otherwise perfectly functional computers. Corporate Japan made a collective decision. They would stay on Windows 10 indefinitely. They would pay Microsoft's premium pricing for extended security updates if necessary, but they would not upgrade to Windows 11. Consider Yamamoto Corporation, which operates 140 retail locations throughout Japan. They manage approximately 2,800 computers running point-of-sale systems, all operating on Windows 10. Their IT department conducted a pilot test, installing Windows 11 on 50 machines to evaluate performance. The results were stark. Their proprietary POS software ran 23% slower on Windows 11. Transaction processing time increased from 38 seconds to 47 seconds on average. That's 9 seconds of additional processing per transaction. With approximately 400 transactions daily per location, each store was losing roughly 3,600 seconds, or 1 full hour of productivity every single day. Across 140 locations, that adds up to 140 hours of lost productivity daily across the entire operation. Yamamoto Corporation's decision was straightforward. They would stay on Windows 10. They would pay Microsoft $61 per computer annually for extended security support. That's $170,800 $100 every year to keep using yesterday's operating system rather than upgrade to today's free version. They would literally rather pay to use an old product than switch to the new one without spending a dime. That's how fundamentally broken Windows 11 was for their operations. Germany tells an almost identical story, though the reasons are different. Germany is Europe's largest economy and has always been a critical Windows market. As of April 2025, Windows 11 adoption sat at 19.7%. Windows 10 maintained 63.4% market share. Linux, meanwhile, had climbed to 11.2%, while macOS held 5.7%. German businesses weren't just staying on Windows 10, they were actively exploring Linux and Mac alternatives. The driving factor was regulatory compliance. Specifically GDPR, Germany's Federal Office for Information Security, conducted a comprehensive 6-month evaluation of Windows 11. Their conclusion was unambiguous. Even with all telemetry settings minimized and data collection turned off as much as technically possible, Windows 11 was transmitting user data in ways that violated GDPR requirements. German businesses that handle customer data cannot legally deploy Windows 11 without exposing themselves to regulatory fines that could reach millions of euros. The implications were clear. The Federal Office for Information Security issued official guidance to German businesses: either evaluate alternative operating systems or remain on Windows 10 with extended support. The choice was between choosing a different platform and staying in perpetually on an outdated one, but neither option involved upgrading to Windows 11. This wasn't hypothetical. Deutsche Bank, one of Germany's largest financial institutions, made international headlines in March when they announced a massive strategic shift. They committed to deploying 47,000 MacBook Pros to their employees over a 3-year period, eliminating Windows from their organization almost entirely. The official public statement cited strategic IT modernization and platform diversity. Leaked internal documents told a different story. Windows 11 fundamentally failed to meet their data protection requirements. Deploying it would have created unacceptable GDPR violation risks. Rather than engage in eternal extended support payments for Windows 10, they decided to switch their entire infrastructure to Mac OS. Microsoft didn't lose a customer. They lost one of Germany's most significant corporate accounts. Siemens, the multinational industrial giant, announced a similar initiative. With 300,000 employees globally, including 180,000 office workers in jurisdictions with strict GDPR requirements, they couldn't rely on Windows 11. Siemens started piloting Linux on 50,000 workstations. If the pilot succeeded, a complete migration over 5 years would follow. Volkswagen launched their own evaluation, testing Ubuntu on 30,000 developer workstations. BMW opened formal reviews of Mac OS for 15,000 corporate employees. Germany's largest companies, the corporations that spent decades investing in Windows expertise and infrastructure, started planning systematic exits from the platform. They didn't want to leave. They didn't prefer alternatives. The math was simple though. Windows 11 created legal risk and operational problems. That was sufficient motivation, but the story gets worse when you examine the United States market. The United States is Microsoft's home territory, the market where Windows should be strongest, where network effects and business relationships run deepest. If Windows was going to maintain dominance anywhere, it should be America. As of March 2025, enterprise Windows 11 adoption in the US sat at 31.4%. On the surface, that's better than Japan's 11.3% or Germany's 19.7%. But the statistic is fundamentally misleading. That 31.4% figure includes computers shipped with Windows 11 pre-installed by equipment manufacturers. It includes deployment through default hardware configurations, not through active migration decisions. IT departments didn't choose Windows 11 because they evaluated it and decided it was superior. They got Windows 11 because that's what Dell, HP, and Lenovo shipped. Actual active migrations, where IT teams consciously decided to upgrade existing Windows 10 infrastructure to Windows 11, were minimal. The momentum wasn't building, it was stalling. Gartner surveyed 750 large US enterprises and asked a direct question about Windows 11 migration plans. The results were catastrophic for Microsoft. 23% of large US enterprises reported they have no plans to migrate from Windows 10. forever. They're prepared to pay for extended security updates indefinitely, accepting that cost as permanent. They've decided staying is cheaper than changing. 41% reported they're actively evaluating alternatives. They're piloting macOS for subsets of their workforce. They're testing Linux for developer teams. They're exploring Chromebooks for specific use cases. They haven't committed to leaving Windows entirely, but they're systematically reducing their Windows footprint. Only 36% reported full commitment to Windows 11 migration. Do the math. 2/3 of major US enterprises are either explicitly rejecting Windows 11 or actively reducing their dependence on Windows platforms. The survey results consistently pointed to why: performance problems, application compatibility failures, user resistance to interface changes, security concerns about features like recall and Copilot, the cost of hardware, upgrades to meet TPM 2.0 requirements. Every single reason boiled down to the same conclusion: Windows 11 is worse than Windows 10 for business operations. Goldman Sachs became the example everyone was watching. Goldman Sachs publicly announced they would deploy macOS computers to 70,000 employees. A top-tier investment bank abandoning Windows entirely. The financial services industry tends to move in herds. If Goldman switches to macOS, Morgan Stanley starts evaluating. If Morgan Stanley switches, Bank of America follows. If Bank of America leaves, Citigroup has to consider it. The cascade effect could systematically eliminate Windows from Wall Street. That's tens of billions in enterprise licensing revenue at risk because Windows 11 pushed the most influential IT decision makers toward alternatives. The education market reveals perhaps the most devastating consequence. Schools and universities represent Microsoft's future customer base. Students who learn operating systems and school develop loyalties that last decades. They enter the workforce comfortable with specific platforms. They become IT decision makers who recommend what they know. Education was historically where Microsoft ensured the next generation of users. That pipeline is breaking. Current Chromebook market share in education sits at 61%. Windows has dropped to 28%. macOS accounts for 11%. Windows used to own education. Now it's a distant third place. Cost is partially responsible, but the core issue is Windows 11's hardware requirements. Schools operate on limited budgets. Computers in educational facilities typically last 7 to 10 years before replacement. Many school districts still operating computers purchased between 2017 and 2019 faced an impossible choice when Windows 11 was released. These machines were perfectly functional, still had years of useful life remaining, and met all genuine computing needs. But they couldn't run Windows 11 due to TPM 2.0 requirements and processor limitations. School districts could either spend $12 to $18 million replacing computers that worked fine or switch to something that ran on existing hardware. Most chose the latter. Los Angeles Unified School District, the second largest school district in the United States, made international headlines in February when they announced their plan. They would replace 200,000 Windows computers with Chromebooks over 4 years. The decision from a district of LAUSD's scale influences hundreds of other districts nationwide. Chicago Public Schools opened evaluation discussions. New York initiated pilots. Houston started research. The trend became unmistakable. Windows 11's requirements priced Windows out of the education market entirely. Universities followed the same pattern. UC Berkeley migrated 28,000 student laboratory computers to Ubuntu Linux. Stanford began testing Linux on 15,000 systems. MIT deployed Chromebooks for 8,000 freshman laptops. These aren't random institutions. Berkeley, Stanford, and MIT are elite universities that produce some of the world's most influential technologists. Students graduating from these campuses learned on Linux and Chrome OS. They developed native fluency with non-Windows platforms. When they enter the workforce, they become comfortable with alternatives. When they transition into IT leadership positions, they choose what they know. Microsoft is systematically losing the next generation of technology leaders and decision makers because Windows 11 forced schools toward alternatives. The education impact represents long-term damage to Microsoft's ecosystem. The developer community represents an immediate existential threat. Stack Overflow released their 2025 developer survey, and the results revealed something unprecedented in in computing history. Professional developer Windows usage dropped to 41.8% of respondents. macOS reached 32.3%. Linux climbed to 25.9%. For the first time, more professional developers use non-Windows platforms than use Windows. Windows lost its majority share among the people who build software. This matters profoundly because developers build applications. If developers don't use Windows, they don't prioritize Windows in their development process. Applications get built for macOS and Linux first. Windows versions follow later if they arrive at all. This reverses 30 years of self-reinforcing advantage. Windows remained dominant because developers built Windows applications. That kept users on Windows. Users on Windows created market incentives for more Windows development. The cycle reinforced itself continuously for 3 decades. That cycle is now reversing. Developers have moved away from Windows. They're not building Windows first. The market incentive structure that drove Windows dominance is collapsing. Inside Microsoft, the January 2025 boardroom meeting grew intensely heated. Executives defended strategic decisions. Gates pushed back aggressively. Why ship recall when security researchers immediately identified critical vulnerabilities? Why force Copilot into Windows when users experienced it as intrusive? Why make the operating system measurably slower when performance is what customers actually value? What happens when the technology you depend on every single day becomes your worst nightmare? Right now, over 1 billion people worldwide use Windows to power their daily computing needs. And at this very moment, hundreds of millions of those machines are experiencing a technological meltdown that almost nobody anticipated. Systems are entering endless restart cycles. Devices are locking up completely with error screens. Essential components like menus, navigation bars, and file management tools simply refuse to function. This isn't some wild theory or a minor bug affecting a handful of users. This is the reality of Windows 11. What started as a standard software patch in late 2024 has transformed into an ongoing catastrophe that Microsoft has struggled to contain. The update meant to strengthen security ended up destabilizing the entire platform, and the scope of this disaster keeps expanding. Approximately 500 million machines running previous Windows versions can't make the jump to Windows 11 because they lack the required hardware specifications. Another 500 million eligible devices have deliberately avoided upgrading, partly because their users have witnessed this unfolding chaos and chosen to stay put. Meanwhile, those who either upgraded voluntarily or got automatically pushed into the new system are finding their computers unreliable, unpredictable, and sometimes completely non-functional. We're going to break down exactly what caused this breakdown, why the attempted repairs haven't resolved the fundamental issues, and what this situation means for everyone who relies on Windows for their livelihood, education, communication, or creative work. You need to understand this situation right now because another update might already be installing on your machine without your knowledge. When Microsoft unveiled Windows 11 back in June 2021, they positioned it as their most protected, reliable, and advanced operating system to date. The message was straightforward. Windows 11 would leverage cutting-edge hardware security components, including specialized encryption chips and verified boot processes, to defend users against malicious software and ransomware attacks that had compromised older platforms. The refreshed design promised enhanced speed, improved task management, and tighter integration with internet services and mobile technology. Updates would supposedly be more compact, quicker to apply, and less intrusive than the notoriously problematic Windows 10 update experience. Microsoft even declared that Windows 11 would provide users with greater visibility and authority over their information through clearer data collection categories and improved privacy controls. The system officially launched in October 2021, but the distribution was carefully controlled through what Microsoft terms compatibility blocks. These are essentially safety measures meant to stop devices with recognized hardware or software conflicts from upgrading until those conflicts get addressed. On the surface, this appears like a prudent strategy. In reality, it meant millions of users were left in limbo while others got automatically forced into a system that wasn't prepared for widespread deployment. The significant Windows 11 version 24H2 update that dropped in October 2024 was marketed as bringing fresh capabilities and better efficiency. Instead, it became the catalyst for a cascade of breakdowns that revealed serious fundamental flaws in how Microsoft evaluates, releases, and maintains its software. On September 26, 2024, Microsoft deployed update KB5043145 targeting Windows 11 versions 22H2 and 23H2. This was classified as a preview update, making it technically optional and designed for preliminary testing before becoming part of mandatory security releases. Within a single day, complaint reports started overwhelming Microsoft community forums, social media platforms, and technical support channels. Machines were getting trapped in restart cycles, continuously attempting to reboot without ever successfully loading the operating system. Other systems froze entirely, displaying error screens that rendered the device completely unresponsive. In numerous instances, the automatic diagnostic tool that launches after multiple failed restart attempts would activate, but even that couldn't resolve the core problem. On systems with disk encryption enabled, users were abruptly asked to provide recovery keys they had never been instructed to store, essentially barring them from accessing their own information. Security analysts and technology reporters rapidly identified a more serious problem. Microsoft had confirmed in a technical document that the update was causing network connection failures for applications running locally on the device, meaning software hosted directly on the machine could no longer establish network connections. This disrupted development environments, local web applications, database systems, and other tools that programmers and IT specialists rely on constantly. Microsoft issued an emergency correction to address the connection issue, but cautioned that the repair could take over 2 days to reach affected machines. During that period, users facing problems were advised to manually check for updates and restart their computers, even if no new updates appeared available. For millions of individuals, that guidance accomplished nothing. Then, during November 2024, Microsoft verified an even more extensive problem. Updates released following July 2024 for Windows 11 versions 24H2 and 25H2 had introduced a defect in XAML, the underlying framework that drives the Windows visual interface. This defect caused the operating system to fail in properly registering certain interface packages after update installation. The consequences were devastating. The start menu became unresponsive to clicks. The taskbar vanished completely. The settings application refused to launch. Some users logged in to encounter nothing but an empty screen with no desktop elements, no icons, and no method to interact with the system whatsoever. File management tools crashed continuously, making it impossible to reach files, directories, or storage devices. Microsoft acknowledged that virtually all primary Windows 11 features were compromised. You might assume that if you haven't installed these particular updates, you're protected, but here's the critical reality. Many Windows 11 machines are configured to download and apply updates automatically, regardless of user approval. Microsoft has deployed certain updates even on systems where automatic updating was supposedly turned off. And because the interface defect impacts updates released after July 2024, anyone who maintained their system with current patches over recent months could be operating a compromised version of Windows without awareness until a vital feature fails at the most inconvenient moment possible. As documentation of widespread breakdowns accumulated, oversight agencies and privacy protection groups started paying attention. Throughout the European Union, data protection officers have extensively examined how Windows gathers diagnostic and usage information. Windows 11 was engineered to provide distinct separation between mandatory and optional data collection, which was intended to satisfy data protection principles. However, when fundamental system features fail and users get locked out of their own devices, the question of data management becomes irrelevant. You can't control privacy configurations if you can't even access the configuration interface. Protection organizations across multiple countries have sounded alarms about the security crisis developing as millions of users remain on Windows 10 because they either lack the capability to upgrade or actively refuse to do so. The support deadline for Windows 10 arrives in October 2025, leaving an estimated 400 to 600 million devices exposed to unaddressed security vulnerabilities once Microsoft discontinues releasing updates. Security professionals have also documented specific weaknesses introduced in Windows 11 version 24H2. One vulnerability targets a background service, allowing an attacker with basic local access to substitute a critical system file with a compromised version and obtain complete system-level control. This category of privilege elevation vulnerability presents particular danger on business networks, where a single compromised machine can serve as an entry point for attackers to navigate across the entire digital infrastructure. Another security concern involves an error reporting utility that can be manipulated to extract password information from system memory without triggering most protective software. Researchers demonstrated that by utilizing an older version of this file from a previous Windows version and executing it on Windows 11 version 24H2, they could extract sensitive authentication data. These discoveries matter because they demonstrate that Windows 11 isn't merely unstable, it's also creating new attack opportunities that didn't exist in earlier versions. The concepts of data minimization and user permission, which regulations demand, presume that the operating system itself is dependable and operational. When the OS crashes repeatedly, fails to load essential components, and exposes new privilege elevation pathways, the entire framework collapses. Regulators haven't yet imposed formal penalties or restrictions specifically connected to the Windows 11 update failures, but the destruction of user confidence and the potential for security breaches on compromised systems generate legal and financial exposure for any organization implementing these updates broadly. Microsoft hasn't published the identities of specific individuals who lost information or access to critical systems because of these updates, but the risk categories are evident. Consider a small business proprietor with 6 Windows 11 computers all configured to update automatically overnight. One morning they arrive to discover the start menu won't respond, the taskbar has disappeared, and file management crashes every time they attempt to access business documents. They have financial deadlines approaching, employee payments to process, and billing to send. Instead, they invest the entire day following technical workarounds that require modifying the Windows registry, a process most ordinary users should never need to perform. The expense isn't just time, but forfeited income, missed deadlines, and damaged client relationships. For someone working in healthcare, the implications are even more severe. Medical professionals and administrative staff frequently use Windows-based electronic health documentation systems. If an update causes configuration tools to stop responding or file management to crash, they cannot access patient information, prescribe treatments, or document care. If a privilege escalation weakness is exploited on a medical network, an attacker could obtain access to confidential patient information, breaching healthcare privacy regulations and exposing the organization to substantial penalties and legal consequences. The identical risk extends to legal professionals managing privileged communications, financial advisors handling account credentials, and educators storing student information. These aren't theoretical situations created to generate alarm. They're realistic, practical illustrations of what occurs when the operating system that drives billions of dollars of global productivity, education, healthcare, and business fails at scale. Following the initial breakdown wave, Microsoft removed several compatibility blocks, preventing Windows 11 version 24H2 from installing on devices with particular biometric sensors. On November 8, 2024, Microsoft lifted the upgrade restriction related to fingerprint. Sensors that had become unresponsive, requiring users to install cumulative update KB5044284. The company also recognized the interface defect and published workarounds involving manually restarting system processes or executing command line instructions to re-register interface packages. But none of these constitute simple repairs that an average user can confidently perform without risking additional damage. Microsoft stated it's developing a permanent solution, but as of late 2024, no schedule has been announced. Here's what remains broken. The privilege escalation weakness in the background service can be exploited with minimal technical complexity and requires only basic user access rights. The exploit methodology has been published publicly, and while Microsoft released a security correction, the fact that such a fundamental vulnerability existed raises serious concerns about development practices and quality assurance. The error reporting utility weakness remains exploitable on systems running Windows 11 version 24H2, although security software now identifies some attempts to abuse the tool. However, identification isn't prevention. If an attacker employs concealment methods or disables protective software initially, the exploit can still succeed. Your entire system is safeguarded by security mechanisms that can be circumvented using publicly available tools and methods. Even if you've installed every available correction, the fundamental architecture of Windows 11 has introduced new vulnerabilities that weren't present in Windows 10. Microsoft's response has been reactive, not anticipatory. Navigate to your configuration interface, locate privacy and security settings, and examine application permissions. Disable camera, microphone, and location access for any applications that don't require those capabilities. This reduces potential harm if a privilege escalation exploit provides an attacker control over a background process. For technically skilled users, open your file management tool and navigate to your program data directory. Look for a folder related to the cross-device service. If it exists, confirm your system has obtained the latest security updates by accessing your update interface and manually checking for new patches. For the interface defect, if the start menu, taskbar, or settings won't open, access your task manager using keyboard shortcuts. Locate Windows Explorer, select it, and restart the process. This may temporarily restore capability, but it doesn't address the underlying cause. Your operating system doesn't exclusively work for your benefit anymore. It also operates for the corporation behind it. When the system breaks down, you lose access to your work, your documents, and your capacity to function in a digital environment. The corporations that construct these systems release corrections and proceed to the next feature release. You're left diagnosing problems, recovering backups, and hoping the subsequent update doesn't destroy everything again. You have two options right now. Option 1, take 5 minutes immediately to pause updates, reduce data collection, and examine your application permissions using the guidance outlined previously. Option 2, inform one person you know who uses Windows and might be unaware of these dangers. Leave a comment and indicate which option you selected. The update that compromises your system could already be downloading to your device at this very moment. The tech industry spent the last 2 years telling you that AI computers are the future. Microsoft pushed Windows 11 AI PCs as essential upgrades. Every press release promised revolutionary features that would transform how you work. But at CES 2026, something unprecedented happened. Dell, Microsoft's largest hardware partner responsible for 40% of their PC revenue, said what everyone was thinking, but nobody dared to say out loud. Consumers don't actually want these AI-powered machines. Kevin Terwilliger, Dell's head of product, didn't bury this in corporate speak. He stated plainly that AI capabilities confuse customers more than help them understand what they're buying. This wasn't some small manufacturer trying to grab headlines. This was the industry's biggest player, admitting the emperor has no clothes at the world's most important trade show. Microsoft launched Copilot Plus PCs in June 2024 with bold promises. These machines needed neural processing units capable of 40 trillion operations per second. They were marketed as fundamentally different from anything before, the fastest and most intelligent Windows PCs ever built. The flagship feature was called Recall, designed to function as photographic memory for your computer. Every few seconds, Recall captures screenshots of whatever you're doing. Everything you type, every website you visit, every document you open gets saved into a searchable timeline. Microsoft said this would revolutionize productivity. No more searching through folders or trying to remember file names. Your computer would remember everything for you, all processed locally with no data sent to the cloud. Then security researchers actually examined how it worked. Kevin Beaumont published findings in May 2024 that Microsoft conveniently omitted from their marketing. Recall was taking screenshots every 5 seconds by default, not selective captures of important moments, but continuous surveillance of everything on your screen. Messages from Signal and WhatsApp that users thought disappeared, passwords entered into login forms, credit card numbers typed into payment fields, medical records viewed in healthcare portals. Everything was being captured and stored. The screenshots lived in a SQLite database on your hard drive. When researchers examined this database, they discovered it wasn't even encrypted in the initial version. Security researcher Kevin Beaumont developed a tool that could extract the entire database in under 2 minutes. Any malware with basic file access could read months of your computing history. Anyone with physical access to your laptop could see everything you'd done for 3 months. Microsoft's sensitive information filter was supposed to block passwords and financial data. Independent testing revealed it failed systematically. The filter only worked when information was labeled exactly how the system expected. An unlabeled credit card number? Captured. A password field without the word password. Nearby, captured. Test after test showed enough sensitive data slipping through to create serious privacy risks. The implications go far beyond stolen laptops. Corporate IT departments with remote management tools can access these files. Regular backup systems now contain months of screenshot data. Security vulnerabilities that allow remote code execution can exfiltrate the entire database. The data doesn't need to leave your computer intentionally to become accessible to others. Privacy advocates called it a surveillance nightmare. The UK's Information Commissioner launched inquiries. Security professionals compared it to keylogging malware that users normally remove immediately. The comparison wasn't exaggeration. Recall was doing exactly what spyware does, creating comprehensive records of user activity without clear informed consent. Microsoft delayed the launch from June to October, then to December. They made it opt-in instead of opt-out. They added encryption protected by Windows Hello biometric authentication. They implemented filters to block private browsing windows in specific applications. They required virtualization-based security enclaves to protect encryption keys. But when researchers tested the updated version in late 2024, fundamental problems remained. The encryption could be unlocked with a PIN code if biometric authentication wasn't set up. That PIN was often the same 4 to 6 digits users had been using for years. Kevin Beaumont demonstrated that his partner, with no technical knowledge, could access his recall data just by knowing his PIN. The sophisticated encryption collapsed to the security level of a basic locker code. Testing by multiple independent researchers found recall still captured sensitive information the filters were supposed to block. Over time, enough unfiltered data accumulated to create serious exposure. The feature was better than the unencrypted version, but it remained comprehensive surveillance running on millions of devices. Consider real scenarios. A therapist uses their laptop for work notes and personal tasks. Recall captures session notes with patient details. The device gets stolen from their car. The thief doesn't need to crack enterprise encryption. Just guess a 4-digit PIN or use malware during a vulnerable moment. Months of confidential therapy sessions are now compromised. Or a small business owner working on a confidential acquisition deal. Recall captures emails, spreadsheets, and financial documents. Their IT support provider has remote access for troubleshooting. A compromised account at that support company gives attackers a path to the database. Acquisition details leak before the deal closes, costing millions. These scenarios share a pattern. The risk doesn't come from recall working incorrectly. The risk comes from recall working exactly as designed, creating a comprehensive record that becomes a single point of failure for months of sensitive information. After the privacy backlash, Microsoft made changes, but Dell's statement at CES 2026 suggests these changes didn't address the fundamental issue. The problem wasn't just security implementation. The problem was that consumers don't want continuous screenshot surveillance on their computers, regardless of how it's secured. Dell's COO Jeff Clark described an unmet promise of AI in the PC market. There was an expectation that AI would drive demand for new computers. That expectation hasn't materialized. Instead, AI marketing appears to be confusing potential buyers rather than convincing them to upgrade. Windows 11 adoption is running 10 to 12 percentage points behind Windows 10 at the same point in its lifecycle. As of November 2025, Windows 11 held only 53.7% market share among Windows desktops, while Windows 10 still commanded 42.7% despite being past its end of support date. Millions of users are choosing to stay on an unsupported operating system rather than upgrade to Windows 11. Dell's response was strategic. Their new XPS laptops announced at CES 2026 contain neural processing units. They meet Microsoft's Copilot Plus specifications. They ship with the Copilot key because licensing agreements require it. But Dell's marketing deliberately avoids mentioning AI as the primary selling point. Instead, they emphasize battery life, build quality, display technology, and gaming performance. The AI capabilities are present but downplayed. This represents a complete reversal from Dell's 2024 strategy. A year earlier, they embraced AI branding so aggressively they retired their entire traditional product line. XPS, Inspiron, and Latitude were replaced with Dell, Dell Pro, and Dell Pro Max to emphasize AI capabilities. That rebrand was widely widely criticized by customers who found the new names confusing and generic. At CES 2026, Dell announced they were bringing back the XPS brand, effectively admitting the AI-first rebrand had failed. If you're using a Windows 11 Copilot Plus PC, you can disable Recall entirely. Go to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Recall and Snapshots. Toggle off Save Snapshots to prevent new captures. Select Delete Snapshots to remove existing data. For complete removal, open Windows Search and type Windows Features. Select Turn Windows Features on or off. Find Recall in the list and uncheck it. Windows will automatically delete all saved snapshots. Beyond Recall, minimize data collection by going to Settings, Privacy and Security, then Diagnostics and Feedback. Change diagnostic data to required only rather than optional. Review app permissions for camera, microphone, and location access. Disable permissions for applications that don't need them. Dell's admission reveals what Microsoft doesn't want to acknowledge. The company spent 2 years positioning AI as the fundamental reason to upgrade to Windows 11 and purchase new hardware. They tied exclusive features to expensive neural processing units. They created a new category. Marketed as essential for modern computing, they pushed Recall as revolutionary, but when consumers actually evaluated these features, they found solutions to problems most people don't have. Recall promised to help users find things they'd seen before, but most people already have effective methods for organizing work. Image generation tools sound impressive in demonstrations, but solve real needs for only a small subset of users. On-device speech processing might be faster, but existing cloud solutions work well enough that the difference doesn't justify new hardware. The gap between Microsoft's AI vision and consumer priorities created an opening for Dell to publicly distance itself from that strategy. They recognized that continuing to push AI-first marketing would alienate potential customers who care more about reliability, performance, and value than features they won't use. This calculation by a major hardware partner suggests Microsoft's AI push has become a liability rather than an asset in the consumer market. Your operating system is supposed to be a tool that serves your needs, but Windows 11 increasingly feels like a platform for Microsoft's strategic priorities rather than user requirements. AI features you didn't ask for, data collection you need to manually disable, marketing that promises revolutionary capabilities while actual improvements remain invisible to most users. Take 15 minutes to review your privacy settings if you're using Windows 11. Disable Recall if present. Minimize diagnostic data collection. Check app permissions. These aren't perfect solutions, but they reduce exposure. Share this information with someone who uses Windows 11 but might not be aware of these issues. Privacy isn't just personal, it's collective. When a company's biggest hardware partner publicly contradicts their core strategy, that's not just business disagreement. That's a signal that something fundamental has gone wrong with their approach. For over 3 decades, Windows dominated PC gaming not through excellence, but through absence of alternatives. Gaming on a PC meant Windows. There was no debate, no consideration of other options. This wasn't because gamers preferred Microsoft's operating system. It was simply the reality everyone accepted. Every major title was built with Windows as the foundation. Graphics drivers prioritized Windows optimization. Development tools defaulted to Microsoft's platform. Stepping outside this ecosystem meant accepting broken functionality, degraded performance, and vanished support. Linux gaming existed only as a punchline. Online communities ridiculed it. Developers dismissed it entirely, suggesting Linux for gaming marked you as an eccentric hobbyist rather than someone to be taken seriously. The dedicated few who attempted Linux gaming relied on compatibility layers like wine. The experience was brutal. Crashes were frequent. Performance suffered dramatically. Many games simply refused to launch. Hours of manual configuration might get you to a main menu only for the game to freeze moments later. Mac never entered the conversation. Microsoft possessed the ultimate business advantage, a monopoly that didn't appear to be one. Gamers purchased Windows licenses, tolerated forced updates, and accepted whatever Microsoft bundled into the operating system. There was no negotiating power, no exit strategy. Then came a device that shattered these assumptions. February 2022 brought the Steam Deck, a handheld gaming system that didn't run Windows. It ran Linux, not a modified Windows interface, not a dual boot compromise. Pure Linux. By conventional wisdom, this should have doomed the product. Instead, it succeeded beyond all predictions. The Steam Deck demonstrated what Microsoft had worked for decades to obscure. Windows was never necessary for PC gaming. It was simply imposed. Modern games ran smoothly. Load times decreased. Battery performance improved. Gamers suddenly experienced mass PC gaming without Windows licenses, background processes, or forced system modifications. The foundation was Proton, a compatibility layer Valve had been developing quietly for years. While Microsoft concentrated on telemetry and platform control, Valve focused on making games function seamlessly. The industry was stunned by the results. Nearly 90% of Windows games now operate on Linux through Proton. Many perform identically to their Windows counterparts. Some actually run better. Microsoft was no longer the gatekeeper. Panic followed. Microsoft scrambled to adapt Windows 11 for handheld gaming. Performance improvements, interface redesigns, sudden concern for gaming efficiency. None of it stemmed from innovation. All of it came from fear, because once gamers realize Windows is optional, Microsoft loses its fundamental leverage. This represents the first genuine crack in Microsoft's PC gaming dominance in over 20 years. Monopolies don't survive, but exposure. They survive through silence. That silence has ended. Proton builds upon Wine, the translation layer that runs Windows software on Linux. But Valve didn't simply use Wine unchanged. They invested heavily in development, recruited top engineers, and optimized specifically for gaming performance. They partnered with code weavers to accelerate progress. They contributed thousands of improvements to the open source community. Instead of requiring manual configuration, driver troubleshooting, or registry editing, Proton handles everything automatically. You install a game from your Steam library, you click play, the game works. No terminal commands, no configuration files, no technical expertise required. On paper, it sounded promising. In practice, it was transformative. When Steam Deck launched, thousands of Windows exclusive games ran flawlessly on Linux. Not just functional, but flawlessly. Titles like Elden Ring, Spider-Man, God of War, even demanding games like Cyberpunk 2077, all running on a Linux handheld at console quality frame rates. Early adopters were shocked. Online forums erupted with disbelief. Benchmark videos flooded video platforms proving it actually worked. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Linux was the operating system for servers and developers, not gamers. Yet here it was, running the latest 8AA games effortlessly. Microsoft's initial response was dismissive. They likely assumed Steam Deck would appeal only to hardcore Linux enthusiasts, the same small community that had struggled with Linux gaming for 20 years. They probably expected modest sales, followed by obscurity. The numbers told a different story. By late 2022, Steam Deck had sold over 1.5 million units. Every single device ran Linux instead of Windows. That's over 1.5 million Windows licenses Microsoft didn't sell. 1.5 million gamers who proved they didn't need Microsoft's operating system. What makes this terrifying for Microsoft? Steam Deck accounts for roughly half of all handheld gaming PC sales. That means half the handheld gaming market chose Linux over Windows, not because they're technical experts, but because the user experience is superior. You might assume compatibility remains limited. According to ProtonDB, a crowdsourced compatibility database, nearly 90% of Windows games now run on Linux through Proton. Not 50%, not 70, 90. Let that register. 9 out of 10 games designed exclusively for Windows now work on a completely different operating system. ProtonDB categorizes games into performance tiers. Platinum games run perfectly with zero configuration. Gold games require minor adjustments. When you combine Platinum and Gold ratings, the vast majority of tested games work without serious issues. Many games don't just work on Linux, they actually perform better than on Windows. Independent benchmarks show certain titles experience faster load times, smoother frame pacing, and fewer stutters on SteamOS compared to Windows 11. Part of this comes from overhead. Windows 11 runs constant background processes, telemetry services, antivirus scans, automatic updates, and AI features, all consuming system resources while you're gaming. SteamOS is stripped down. It boots directly into a gaming interface. No bloatware, no forced updates interrupting sessions, no telemetry reporting activity to Microsoft, just games running as efficiently as possible. If Linux gaming works this well, why hasn't everyone switched? The answer is momentum and familiarity. Most people have used Windows their entire lives. Switching feels risky, especially without technical confidence. Steam Deck removed that barrier. Users don't install drivers, configure settings, or troubleshoot compatibility. They turn on the device, log into Steam, and start playing. As simple as a console with PC flexibility. Other companies are noticing. In early 2025, Lenovo announced announced the Legion Go, the first third-party handheld officially licensed to ship with SteamOS. This is significant. Valve is no longer the only company offering a Linux-based gaming handheld. Other manufacturers are partnering with Valve. Microsoft sees this threat clearly. Reports emerged that Microsoft had been developing a redesigned Windows 11 version optimized for handheld devices. This new interface boots directly into a full-screen gaming layer similar to Xbox, bypassing the traditional desktop entirely. This isn't coincidence. Microsoft is reacting directly to Steam Deck's success, but even with optimizations, Windows still carries legacy baggage. Telemetry, forced updates, and background services are built into the core. SteamOS doesn't have those constraints because it was designed specifically for gaming. The implications extend beyond handhelds. Steam's hardware survey shows Linux usage crossed 3.2% as of late 2025. That might sound small, but it represents a record high with consistent monthly growth. 3 years ago, when Steam Deck launched, Linux accounted for just 1%. Why does 3.2% matter? Because it represents a tipping point. When a platform crosses 3%, developers and manufacturers pay attention. Games previously ignoring Linux support now test Proton compatibility before launch. Peripheral manufacturers ensure their products work with SteamOS. The ecosystem is becoming self-sustaining. Consider what happens when a gamer buys a Steam Deck and realizes their entire library works perfectly on Linux. They start questioning why they need Windows at all. Maybe their next desktop uses Linux. Maybe they recommend SteamOS to friends. This isn't just about handhelds. It's about proving gaming on Linux is viable. Once that mental barrier breaks, Microsoft loses leverage. Microsoft's worst scenario is playing out. Millions of gamers are choosing Linux-based devices over Windows. Proton compatibility approaches universal coverage. Third-party manufacturers are adopting SteamOS. Microsoft's response feels reactive rather than innovative. There's also timing. Microsoft ended Windows 10 support in late 2025, leaving approximately 240 million devices facing an upgrade decision. Many users don't want Windows 11 because of hardware requirements, intrusive telemetry, and mandatory account integration. For the first time, Linux represents a legitimate alternative, especially for users who primarily game. Imagine a scenario where a gamer's Windows 10 PC reaches end of life. They don't want to pay for Windows 11. They don't want forced updates and AI features they never requested. They look at SteamOS, see 90% of their library is compatible, and realize they can install Linux for free. That's not hypothetical. That's happening now. This is about the future of PC gaming. For 30 years, Microsoft controlled the platform. Gamers accepted it because, well, there was no alternative. Steam Deck proved an alternative exists, and Microsoft is scrambling to respond. The question isn't whether Microsoft will survive. They're a trillion-dollar company. The question is whether they can compete on user experience when they're no longer the only option. Your operating system doesn't just work for you anymore. It works for the company that built it. The difference is you now have a choice. Microsoft spent decades convincing gamers they had no alternative. Steam Deck just proved them wrong.